Hey, Paul.
Hey Fab,
How's it going?
good. You?
Good. Good. First episode of 2024.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Which might sound weird based on when I actually end up publishing this. But it's all good.
Maybe, um,
Maybe.
maybe. So, what are you talking about today, Fab?
Yeah, you were proposing something interesting that we had a hard time to name. So, it's about the winning state of mind in sales, but also, I think more specifically, aligning your sales with client objectives and the buyer's journey. I think that's, if I really had to summarize what we were going to talk about today,
Yeah,
that's what I
yeah.
would call it. Um, so before we go, I know you have like 4 or 5 points or something that you wanted to discuss, but before we get into that, kind of what brought up this
What brought this
idea?
up? Okay, all right. Great question. So, what brought this up is, as you and I both work with clients who are trying to increase their sales. They're trying to make things better. They're trying to grow. They're trying to grow their teams. They're trying to make their operations better. They're trying to create efficiency in their company. And obviously, naturally, as a human being, they're working on their own stuff. They're working internally. They're making their products better. They're creating better services. They're training their people better. They're coaching their people better. But usually it's all about the product or the service. And when you have a complex product, there's a lot of learning to be done there, which is important.
Hmm.
But what then often happens is that when the reps go out or the people go out, they forget they forget that the client might have an objective or a need, and they just try to they just talk about the immediate problem or challenge and just sell the fix
Yeah.
without really going deeper into what matters to the client. And I see it a lot. I see it a lot. I see it enormously. And what it does is it creates it puts sand in the gears because it slows things down, because human beings like to be considered and understand and understood. Hence, if you're not doing that, yes, it might be a good product and yes, it might help them out. But if they feel you're just selling them something, then they might just buy something from you and you're a supplier and you won't become a partner. Hence, you
Mhm.
won't really develop that more long lasting, deeper relationship. That was a long intro.
Yeah, what's interesting is it's an interesting topic because obviously it changes company to company and industry to industry. But I tend to work with a lot of tech companies and SaaS companies, and I find my experience has been a lot that product, whoever develops a product or creates a product or tends to care a lot about what the customers think, and they usually have some sort of a decent process to figure out what customers want and need, because that's what helps their product
Yeah.
become more sticky. But you're completely right. I feel like completely breaks down when, and I'm maybe being a bit dramatic here, but that breaks down when we get to marketing and sales. Customer service a little less because they deal with customers directly and they hear about what the pains and whatnot directly. But definitely marketing and sales tend to forget a lot about all that. So a lot of effort gets put into the product and how we're offering, especially if that's it. If like obviously we are the product, right? We offer our own
Yeah.
services. But if you have like developers that are developing a product, or if you have separate people who execute what's being sold, like on a services side, or IT companies and all that, they all care a lot about what the customers want because that's what they need to deliver. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about this because how can we help salespeople and sales teams, and and as a result also marketing teams, be more aligned with client objectives and
Well,
buyer journeys?
it's a state of mind. And the first thing I'd say in your state of mind is, and the client doesn't give a shit about your product or your service. They don't. They
Right.
don't care. And if you think that you're going to get them to care about your product or service, you're in la la land. So your first state of mind should be, I'm not here to push my product or service. My state of mind should be the first thing. So if I put this into top 5 things, the first thing is you should know or find out your client's objectives. And how do you do that? Well, it's in the title of the podcast. Ask the right question. So, number one, take the time to really find out what your client objectives are. What do I mean by that? Beyond what your product will fix immediately, what does it enable your client to achieve? What are they
Yeah.
trying to achieve? To give an example, if you sell if you sell a service that helps a company work a little bit better, and they manufacture bicycles, well, ultimately you're helping them sell more bicycles. Yes, true. But ultimately, you might be helping them to grow their company. You might be helping them to grow into another country. You might be helping them develop that new model that they want to put out next year. So take the time to ask the questions to understand you as a cog in the wheel. What are you enabling them to do? What are you enabling them to achieve ultimately when you're going further into this? To me, that's number one. That's the first thing. So that's part of your state of mind. Okay, it's not just about me and my product. It's about, first thing is I need to find out their objectives, tactically speaking. So how do you do that? You ask the right questions.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I think, and obviously this is not the show specifically, but we've talked about asking questions a lot. And I find, when we talk about asking questions, I think a visual that a lot of people have are there must be a list of questions somewhere. Like, just give me the list of questions I need to ask, right? And we know it's not that, but we talked about how that's not the fact. So I like what you're saying, where it's your state of mind, like going into that call or these calls, depending however number of calls you need to understand. You have to go into those calls knowing there's something, right? Like even just me, I was speaking to somebody today, and they're like, "Yeah, here's kind of the things we want, blah 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 blah," and I'm like, great, let's schedule some time to discuss, but if I'm able to get to a state of mind when I start that call starts, that okay, but there's a reason why they want all of
Yeah,
this,
exactly.
and
Yeah,
let's try to get to
yeah.
that, and let's face it, in reality, you're not always going to be successful, right? Some people are more guarded. Sometimes it's a little bit more, it's more difficult to get there. Training, coaching, and all that, will help. But if you don't have them, it might be difficult. Some people are just tire kickers, right? And so
Well, that's it.
there
And
is
if you
no,
take the time to ask those questions, a very good point, Fab. If you take the time to ask questions, usually open-ended questions about why they're even willing to speak with you. Like I've said this to you before, but I think I've said this to you before. Maybe I just said it on LinkedIn. One of the questions I love asking is, you've accepted this meeting. What are your expectations from this meeting? That's a great
yeah,
way to find out what are their objectives. And then you just follow up with questions. And even with someone who's non-verbose or quiet, if they accepted the meeting, they'll tell you, well, I accepted the meeting because I'm hoping to find a fix to this problem, or to create an opportunity here. Oh, and then the
mm-hmm.
next question becomes, once they've told you all that, well, what does that enable you to do? So
Right,
those objectives are really important. But I'm sure you forget sometimes. We sell this stuff, and I'm sure I forget to do it, because
yeah,
when your product is so right and your client sees it, sometimes we forget to go there, because it's like,
yeah,
like in your case, yeah, we need HubSpot and we need an integrator, and what you're saying, Fab, is all the right stuff, and the client says, yeah, and then you might forget to go to that next stage, and it's not the end of the world, but at one point you should have that conversation, because you should understand, if I take you specifically, or me, what do our services bring to them to help them move forward?
yeah. And I know we've talked about this before, and I think it's a good intro to your next point, which is the buyer's understanding the buyer's journey. Is that not all prospects that you're talking to are are the same, right? And we've talked about this before, where if, and maybe that's happened, doesn't happen as much with you, but for me, it definitely has or does. When people are out there buying software, let's say CRMs specifically, you have broadly two types of people. You have the people that are like, I don't know what I want, like this, maybe that, I don't know, and
Yeah,
then you need to dive and understand their objectives and understand all
yeah,
that. But then there's the seasoned buyer, right?
yeah,
Like, this is a sales leader who's bought 16 CRMs already throughout his career or her career, and she knows exactly what she needs. She's like, she doesn't need to dive deeper. she's like, I understand the value of the CRM. I know because
Yeah.
I've implemented some. I want to get HubSpot. I just need somebody to help me
Yeah.
implement it.
But then she'll
Um,
confirm it to you. She'll say, "Hey, look, I've done this
yeah,
16 times before. I know exactly what I need. I know it's going to help me do this, this, that." And then you might just say, "Hey, that's great. You know, when you say this, this, that, can you tell me more about that?" She might say, "Oh, well,
yeah,
we're going to do this." So it's just show. It's basically showing interest
yeah.
in the objective of your client. So even if they know exactly what they want, which is fine, you can still show interest in what their objectives are. Right?
Yeah,
Say, hey, I'm really happy you know exactly what you need, and I'll help you out with that. Hey, can I just ask you, you know, and it's just, and it's basic human knowledge, and that brings us into buyer's journey, right? And which is,
yeah,
I think it's a very good segue what you said, because that buyer that you're talking about, she's into her buyer's journey. She's already at, well, I'm ready to buy, right? But you know,
right.
in the typical buyer's journey, there's you know, there's you know, I'm not aware at all of what's going on. Then there's awareness. Then there's interest. Then there's the I guess there's moving towards trust. People call it different things. And then there's finally the decision process. And then yes, we're going to go ahead. So
Yeah,
you I think as a salesperson, we don't teach this enough, but you need to go and look at what typically happens in buyer's journey. And it's stupid that we don't teach it, because really most people have bought something. So you can even look internally at yourself and say, well, when I buy something, you know, and it's mostly B2C, what is my buyer's journey? And if you're
yeah,
lucky enough to have bought something B2B, you can also look at what your buyer's journey is.
yeah,
You know, little parentheses here. What often happens is that a lot of salespeople haven't been in a B2B buying position and think that it's very different to be selling B2B than it is B2C. It is very different, but there are some similarities, whereas emotion is still tied in. So if you haven't done B2B buying, take the time to understand that buyer's journey and what the person is going through. What do you think about that?
yeah. And I mean, I think that's where the crux of the training is, right? And you're right. Like, you know, especially again, the world that I work in, I work with a lot of junior reps that, you know, they've never bought a car, they've never bought a condo, they've never bought anything that's like expensive, right? Like, because you can probably equate a B2B purchase to something, maybe a higher ticket item like a house, right? Where you're probably going to
Yeah,
go and speak with your spouse and like go back and forth and
yeah,
visit and stuff like that, and make determine some of your needs and whatnot. But that's where the training and the coaching comes in, right? Like, I think buyer's journey is, to me, is critical, and you can always see, uh, you know, it always pains me. Maybe again, I'm dramatic today, Paul.
I
I'm
like that. I
dramatic,
like
but
this.
it
Drama's good in
pains
a
me,
podcast.
you know, like there's so many companies that are selling great products and great services, and it's like they're not taking into account like how are people buying this. And
Yeah,
yeah, there's a salesperson, right? And this podcast is, or this um show is mainly a sales driven, uh but that applies to sale, to marketing and customer service as well, right? The buyer's journey is not, doesn't end at the sale, it doesn't start at the first phone call, right?
yeah,
There's, it's all part of the process. Like, how are they gathering information, how are they getting educated, you know,
yeah,
like the stats have been out for a long time, you know, by the time somebody speaks with sales, they're already a good chunk down the way of their
yeah,
buyer's journey, whether it's B2B or B2C. And so it's really critical that a company understands all those steps, right? That everything that happens, you know, before they speak to sales, while they're speaking with sales, and after they speak with sales,
yeah.
is critical.
That's interesting, Fab, because honestly, when I was thinking buyer's journey, I was really just thinking of the portion where the salesperson's there. But you're right. Every salesperson should go in to see what happens before they've even spoken to you, what's gone on in their journey, what's their knowledge, what have they doing, and what's going to happen afterwards. Very good point. Um,
Yeah, because if you think about it, you know, we talked about cold calling a lot in the past, and you know that's one of the bigger challenges with the cold call is that the person you're speaking with might not have even started their buyer's journey,
yeah,
right? Like when you're cold calling somebody, you have no idea where they are at. Like, yeah, once in a while you're hoping that somebody's, you know, you fall at the right place at the right time, but the reality is like most people have not. and and that's why the pre-sales part of your customer journey is just as critical as the sales part of your customer journey or your buyer's journey. and the post sale part as well.
Yeah,
If upsells and cross sells are critical to
absolutely, to understand. And if you are doing a full-on cold call where they know nothing about you, you need to know that they know nothing about you. And
yeah,
how do you get them in that frame of mind? Very good, very, very good point. Thank
yeah,
you. We had to move on or else we won't finish. Next point.
yeah.
So how, and this is important because how does your, and this is not just like what's good about your product, but how does your product or service help them not just solve the challenge or the problem, but how does it help them achieve that objective that you discovered? So, in essence, you're fixing a problem. You might be a very small piece of the pie, but if you're the ball bearing in the wheel, the car's not going anywhere if you don't have any ball bearings. So, and if your objective is to go from Montreal to Toronto, well, you try getting from Montreal to Toronto without any ball bearings in your in your wheel. So essentially, how do you fit into that process? What are you helping them with? So you've considered their objectives. You've considered the buyer's journey. Like we've said, we've added the front end where are they coming from? What's their universe before you even exist? And then now, how will your product or service help them achieve not just the challenge or the opportunity, the objectives? And that's super important. So if you then again, you're putting yourself in the right state of mind because you're looking at these 5 things before you're starting to go, okay, this is where I'm going to go. And after that, then I'd say, and I wrote these down to make sure, how does your, and this is I think where you can add a lot of value here, how does your sales process as a company or as an individual ensure that you are doing these things properly? So, if we talk about a CRM that is enabling you to remember the steps you need to do. So your sales process is not just like introduction, say who I am, talk about the product, whoa, do a demo, close.
Yeah.
Your sales process should take these things into the consideration to make sure that you're in a state of mind, not just to talk about your product, but to understand what's going through. And I want to reiterate this, is that what happens is you spend so much time learning about your product. You spend so much time learning about what it is that you guys do. You're training everything internally. So you find out so much about your product that you naturally in your headspace is taken up with a lot more of what you do, and particularly if it's a complex product. Like I was talking to some medical supplies people. I mean, they've got a ton of stuff in their heads. So they just come out there and their head is filled with this. Well, some of them might be forgetting about the objectives of the people in front of them. It's great that you've got this medical tool, but the person using the medical tool doesn't really care about the medical tool. They're just trying to save a life or they're trying to cure a cold or whatever it is they're trying to do. So your sales process should be reminding you this all the time. And I think, we've talked about this a lot, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's, and yeah, I mean, you're right, because it's easy, let's say, to talk about what we just talked about, like right here on a podcast or even in a training session, right? Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense, right? And salespeople will get excited. Your sales team will get excited with that. But then is how do you remind them throughout the journey, right? Because especially if you have a longer sales cycle, right? Like a long time ago, I worked with a client. They had basically a one call sale, right? So it's easy to in that call remember what are they trying to achieve? Yes, no, boom, it's sold or not sold. But when you have a longer, and even longer is subjective, right? Even a month long sales process where you need to have multiple calls and all that, it's easy to get bogged down into the nitty gritty where you have to figure stuff out. So then how does your sales process, how does your pipeline and HubSpot help remind you and remind the team of the buyer journey and how what their objectives are and how you're going to help them achieve is critical. And it's funny you brought that up. I was helping a client out. They're revamping kind of the way they're tracking win and loss reasons, and the product team came with very detailed asks. And I'm like, my initial reaction, having worked with a lot of salespeople, was like, no salesperson is ever going to ask any of this. Your answers are always going to be the first option in the drop down, and that's it. But then as I was helping implement them, I realized the coaching that needs to happen or the training that needs to happen is actually for the sales leaders, because a lot of these really encourage to ask better questions, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of time a salesperson might be told, oh well, we're already using your competitor. Okay, thanks, bye, and then that's it, right? But if you're training your sales leaders to help their team ask better questions, it could be like, oh, great, great. So maybe not great, they're using a competitor, but can I ask which competitor you're using? And then if you know your product and you know your competitors, you can say like, oh well, has I know companies that use XYZ have a challenge with ABC. Is that something you're experimenting? And then you can continue having that conversation. So I definitely believe your CRM really needs to be set up
Yeah.
to understand that. But more importantly, you have to train your team. We talk all the time asking better questions, but your CRM can be set up so that it forces them to ask better questions, right? Because if they know that they'll need to fill out something in their CRM saying which competitor they've gone with, a sales rep has two options. They could lie, pick whichever one, the first one in the list, right? Or they can
Yeah.
actually be truthful and ask the questions, right? And that's where the training comes in. And that's how the two work together, right? It's like, it's not about giving us the first answer in the drop down menu. It's about asking better questions to maybe sell more, yes, hopefully, but also to gain better insights, right?
Yeah.
Like, which ones are better competitors. Like when we're talking, and I'm just talking about the competitor, but there's like budget
Yeah,
questions.
there's a bunch of other questions. And one thing that we've talked a lot about on offline and maybe even online before is the playbook. If you got a playbook attached to your CRM, well, then that's where you have ongoing training or reminders of what
Yeah,
needs to be done. And this is a really good one. If you've got a good playbook set up there, the sales leaders can lean on that to ensure that the salespeople are doing it properly. Again, if your CRM set up properly, it becomes a sales assistant reminding you to think of your client, not just of yourself. Um,
yeah.
and then the last one,
And I'll say, like, before we just move on to your last point, and I know you have a hard stop in a few minutes, but what I'm realizing, the more teams I work with, is like we're so in a rush to make a sale, right? Like salespeople are in a rush to make a sale, and so we build all these playbooks and we build all these required properties and we build all these stages. But at the end of the day, I find there's the bigger challenge is like how to encouraging your team to use the resources that they have available. And they have like 15 calls back to back, and so they don't have time to read the playbooks. They're not reading the playbooks, and their closing rates suffer. And I think as a sales leader, uh, your your sales process, um, there's a sales pipeline that's in your system, but your sales process needs to include time for research and training in the moment, right?
yeah,
Like, why did you not read the playbook? Read the playbook before. Take 5 minutes. These playbooks are
yeah.
not 16 pages long, right? They're a couple paragraphs or a
Well,
short video.
that's another thing too. Your playbook's got to be set up so that it's attuned to the typical ADHD salesperson, of which I'm one. So you have to have it set up so that it's interesting and helps the people move forward. But yeah, absolutely, I 100% agree with that. And the last point I wanted to bring on, I think the fifth point is it's about your state of mind. What do you do to ensure that you stay in the state of mind? Because you're consistently going to be dragged back into I know everything about my product, about my company. We talk about the company, we talk about the product. So what do you do to ensure that you stay in that state of mind and that you're going to stay customer focused? And to me, it requires two basic elements that you either have to have naturally or you have to develop. Because if you don't have them, it ain't going to work.
Right.
Um, and that's curiosity and empathy. So if you ensure that your state of mind is always driving you towards curiosity and empathy, then you will be curious about your client, and then these things will happen naturally. And if you have empathy, well, then you're going to want to understand what's going on in their reality. So these things help you move forward. So either foster those, learn to have them, or move in that direction. And if you're set up that way and your sales process is set up that way, you make sure you learn the buyer's journey, whatnot, and you foster that curiosity, and as a sales leader, you ensure that your salespeople are exploiting their curious gene and are developing their empathy gene, you're going to be 50% of the way there as a golden rule. I was talking to someone
Yeah.
yesterday. Talking to someone just was it yesterday or the day before. It doesn't matter. And we were chatting about the fact that this person is extremely curious and wants to know so much more. So it comes very naturally for her to ask questions because she's genuinely curious about what's going on in the prospect's life. So this is a good way, and she has empathy, and she learns and she likes to learn. So it puts her in that natural state of mind. If your salesperson has all the difficulty in the world developing that curiosity and that empathy, well, you're going to have a hard time putting yourself in a state of mind that you really want to know about your client's objectives.
Yeah. I agree with you. I mean, it's hard to disagree. I think where the challenge lies, especially for sales leaders, is fostering that curiosity, empathy. Those are not easy behaviors, and the emotion behind that are not easy to direct. So, but it is definitely something important to keep in mind and to help foster. And I think the way you structure your trainings and your coachings can help that, right? Like, so if you're in your coachings, you're asking questions and you're being curious and you're taking the time to be curious and you're taking the time to be empathetic, that, at least sets the ground rules to make that happen in the day to day of your sales team.
Well, and I'll delve into human. I don't want to say psychology, but human nature. Most kids are curious. So at one
Yeah.
point, most people were curious. So basically, if you want to foster that, you've got to help your salespeople find that curiosity again and
Right.
explain to them that, because often in school and the way we're brought up to a bit of that curiosity is sometimes stifled, right? You learn
Yeah.
this, they're not encouraging you to ask questions, they're encouraging you to learn stuff. So
Yeah.
you have to sort of go dig into people, because I very rarely, I don't know about you, but I mean, of all the kids I've ever met, and when they're little, they're always curious.
Yeah.
Think we're mammals. Animals are curious. Little puppies are curious. It's your nature. So you want to foster that. You want to foster that gene and bring it back, because most people have it, and you want to
Yeah.
encourage it rather than stifle it, because often in school we do stifle it. Hey, we don't have time for you to ask a million questions, John. Just do the math exam. you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, you're right again, but I think that's hard. There's a lot of stuff to untangle and to build that in people, to build that back.
maybe
I
number
think
six needs include psychologist in your in
no,
your
I mean it definitely means like being aware of that when you're doing interviews, but it
yeah.
also means to me, you know, because we're talking to sales leaders, it's if you can foster that in yourself, because it's easier to change yourself,
Yep.
then you have a chance of setting those. That behavior and that culture within your team, right? If you're a sales leader that's like boom, 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 and like next, and then
You ask no questions yourself. Exactly. If you're a curious sales leader and you ask questions to your people, they're gonna probably want to ask you questions. If you're asking them about them and what motivates them and what drives them, well, then you might do the same thing, right?
it
Um,
goes back to what I was talking, the example I was giving before, right? Which is
yep.
like if I'm a salesperson and I know I'm going to have to answer which competitor they're gone with, and I didn't ask that question, I'll be ready the next time to
Yep.
ask that question. It's the
Yep.
same thing. If I know I'm going to go into a training or coaching session because I have my one-on-one with my boss today,
Yep.
and and she's going to ask me like what their objectives were, and I didn't ask that. Well, in the long term, I'm going to learn how to ask those questions and
Yep.
to be prepared, or at least the ones that want to stay with your team, right? The ones that don't believe in that or don't feel associated with that. Well, no, listen, this is not for me, right?
This
This
is
is
not for
not a
me,
job.
and they'll go find another job, or you'll fire them.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's a good point. Hey, this was a good session. On that note, I've got to ask you a question, Fab.
Yeah. Go for it.
Do you have any New Year's resolutions?
No, I don't do resolutions. I
Okay.
used to try to find like guiding words and stuff like that. But I just find like it's just all too arbitrary. Like, why January 1st? Like if we were in China, it'd be whatever the Chinese New Year's is, and everybody. There's so many different New Years. There's so many things. I think it's too arbitrary, and it sets ourselves up for failure. I just have general goals of where I want to bring the business.
Okay.
And if that takes a year or 6 years or 3 weeks, like,
Okay. So you set your goals when you need to set them. You don't wait for the new year,
yeah,
whatnot. I'm kind of like you too. I like why wait, right?
yeah,
If you're trying to do something, why wait till January 1st? Just do it all
yeah,
the time. So good one.
yeah.
And yeah, that's good. Well, I'm happy I asked that question. I had some curiosity.
Yeah. I see what you did there. That's funny.
Yeah.
All
um,
right, Paul, this
how
has
do
been
we?
fun.
Yeah. So those are the top 5 things. So quickly, I'll just run through them quickly. Understand number one, understand your client's objectives. Number two, uh, think of the
Concept.
buyer's journey. Number three, how does your product or service help them achieve their objective, not just a challenge? Number four, try to mash that all up into your sales process as a reminder. And then number five, how do you keep yourself in this state of mind? It's really curiosity and empathy.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Awesome. Very
Love you
cool.
all. See you guys later.
Take care, Paul.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Thanks.